Hello and welcome to the Anatomy of a Minecraft Model lecture number 3, Blocks and Items. So in the two previous courses we've taken a look how we can create a model and render that for an entity. We've also seen how we can animate that and how all of that works, like that process. We set up a renderer and a model and so on and so forth. But what we're going to do today is take a look at blocks and items. So how can we render blocks? They work a bit different because they are a bit more restricted, and how can we render items with models as well. So what I'm going to do is, well, use this droid from previous lectures, and I'm going to make sure that that one is being rendered in the hand when you hold it. So in previous lectures we've only used an icon for the item itself that it's placing in this droid, so there will be a difference here where we actually can see it. So what we will have to do is first of all create a item renderer, and that's what I'm going to do. So here we go, right click, new class here. If I head into the view there, so we have a new class here, and what I want to do is call it render droid item. I think that's a good name. So we had render droid for the entity, but now I have render droid item as well. Right, there we go. And we don't need to extend anything specific, so if we head over to render droid, you can see that we're extending a render here. But what we want to do when we come to the item itself, then what we want to do is simply implement item renderer. So that's an interface rather than a class, like so. And then we can simply do add unimplemented methods. Okay, so we have three methods here that we're going to have to work with. The first of the two I'm going to skip for now. I'm just going to return true on both of these. We will take a closer look on them later on in this lecture. And this third one is for rendering the whole thing. To render the whole thing, we obviously need a model to render, and we could create a new one here, but I'm going to use the same for both of them. What I'm going to do is simply, not public, sorry, it should be private model droid model, like so. There we go. And then I add a constructor here, public render render droid item, like that. And here I'm going to ask for the model droid. I could of course create a new one, but I think it's, well, we can use the same. It's totally fine. So I'm just going to do this.model equals model, like that. There you go. So we get the model there. And then if we head over to the render droid, the entity version, what I want to do here is do the same thing actually. So I'm going to remove it from here and instead ask for a droid, a model there. So when I create these rendering things, I send along the model. We don't have to do this if we don't want to, but this allows us to use the same model for both of these things. So there we go, this.model equals model, and now we'll need to head over to the client proxy, because now we have errors in the client proxy, sorry, because obviously we're trying to do something which we can't. We're trying to create a render droid without giving it the model itself, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So model droid model, I guess, equals new model droid, and then it's simply a matter of giving it the model like this. Just import it so it finds it all. And now we come to the item. How should we register that? So we should obviously register that as well, and then it's just a matter of doing Minecraft Forge client, so we need to refer to something else there, and then register item renderer, like that. And now if we do it like that, then we can tell it, alright, this item renderer that we have should be used for a specific item, and the renderer here is of course new render droid item, like that. But we have to give it the model as well, of course. Sweet. Import that. And there you go. Now we have a slightly problem here. What should the item ID? What item ID should it be rendering? Well, first of all, we can refer to the item info dot where is it? The droid ID. There you go. And that might seem good, right? However, it's not. It's a bit weird here, because if we head over to the config handler, we're going to take a look here. So in the config handler, what I do here is ask for the integer and then subtract 256. The reason why I subtract 256 is to make sure that when the item is actually created, it gets the proper ID, because when the item is created, one adds 256 to it. However, if we go to the client proxy here, the ID we're supposed to send along here shouldn't be subtracted with 256 before, yes, because it's not going to be increased here. So it's a bit weird there with the IDs. So to make sure that it works, we'll have to add 256 here again if we refer to the IDs like this. However, by having minus 256 here, that allows us to, in most cases, just refer to the IDs when we need to do something here. But if we don't want to, we could of course refer to just this part here in the config handler, and then when we create the actual item, we would do the minus 256. If we did it that way, then we wouldn't need the plus 256 here. But since I have it set up like I have, I need to increase it by 256 like so. So there we go. Now it should work. We are registering like that. We give it the model, we give it the proper ID, and so on. So now it's time to run it and see how it looks like. Here we go. I'm going to move this up in just a second. A bit more. There you go. Right. So let's grab the item from here and what? It's invisible. And it should be. Let's grab actually a stack of them. An invisible stack. There you go. So when I place it, it actually works like so. And the reason is, of course, we give it a model, but we don't render it at all. But the reason why I wanted to start this is to show that it actually works. It's good to test, so we know that alright, it is actually working. With the registering, we register the item renderer, and therefore, since we give it a proper ID, a bit weird there with the ID, but still, because we do that, it's actually going to control the rendering of this item, both in my hand, in 3D. As you can see, Steve's hand is actually moving if I go between the item and the, well, nothing there. Yes, because we have the item there and we control how that is being rendered, but we don't do anything with that. And that's obviously the next step. So let's head over to the item renderer, wherever that is. Here we go. Okay, so render item, what do we need to do? Well, what we need to do is the following. We need to do similar things to what we do when we render it normally. So first of all, we need to push the matrix, and in the end, what we want to do is pop the matrix. Pop matrix like that. And if we head over to the normal rendering code, the render droid here, we can see that I'm doing the same. First of all, we push the matrix, and in the end we pop the matrix. What's the next step? Well, that's to translate it to its current location, like that, XYZ. But we shouldn't do that when we draw it in the hand or anything, or in the item, or well, in the inventory or on the ground or so, whatnot. So we do that in the entities to make it be placed properly, but we shouldn't do that step here. And this step, however, where we scale it to be in the correct direction, we should still use that step. So the next step I'm going to do here is gl11.gl scale f, and then we just go with -1f, -1f, and 1f like so. There we go. The next part is to bind the texture. We had a predefined way of doing that for the normal rendering code. We just use this method here, and then we overrode this method here, and then everything worked. And we can't really use that for the item, so we're going to do it manually. But I don't want to load the method twice. Well, not the method, the texture, sorry. So what I'm going to do here is simply make this public, so when I load it for the normal entity, then I can use that for the item as well. So then it's just a matter of referring to what is it, render droid dot texture, like that. That's going to be the texture. We're going to use that in just a second. So how do we bind this texture? Well, if you took the last course, the one about interfaces, the climbing the interface ladder, then we used exactly the same thing that we're going to do now to bind the textures. When we wanted to bind a texture in an interface, then what we did was Minecraft.getMinecraft.func and that one with the K there, so func110434_K. And then we have another one, and I want the one with 77A in the end, and then we want to refer to render_droid.texture. So yeah, two unnamed things there, and as we can see, we have one unnamed method there, one there, so we have two there, we have a third there, and a fourth there. And like I've said before, the reason why there are so many unnamed methods are because the way with resource locations, how those things works, are new for Minecraft 1.6. So that's why they are unnamed. They will probably be named later on. Maybe something like you know, get rendering handler, bind texture, or something along those lines. So later on you will have to keep a lookout for those two things. But I don't know, of course, exactly what they're going to be called. Okay, so that's that step. So we're pushing the matrix, scaling the thing properly, sorry, there you go. We're binding the texture, and in the end we pop it. So what we have left is obviously to render the model itself. Model.render like that. And we need to supply it with a few different values. These are easy, just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, like that, like we've done before. And here we want to give it the size, so 0.0625, like that. Now we have a problem. We are supposed to give it an entity. How are we supposed to do that? Well, I'm just going to give it null. Like that. But now, if we're not careful, everything will crash. And the reason is, if we head over to model droid and head down to the rendering code, if the entity here would be null, then, well, it would try to refer to get panel rotation of null, and that's not possible. So what we will have to do is the following. So if droid is not equals to null, like that, then we can do these things, like so. And then we can do if droid is not equals to null, like that, the same thing there. So basically we apply the rotations and so on only if we actually have an entity. But now we tell it, alright, render it without an entity, and therefore you shouldn't apply any rotations. Okay, let's take a look on how that looks like. Right, here we go. So when we take a look at this, we will actually see that the method I did now, how I did it, is not a good one. You know. Okay, so here we go. Here we have the floating droid. Here it looks pretty good actually. We can see it in my hand, even if it's a bit far down. We can see it here in the inventory as well. It's a bit too far up here instead. And you know, it's just being rendered there. Pretty simple. However, look at this. I'm watching around, and boom, it moved. It's actually up. Now it's animating in my hand. That's fine in itself, but when I look away, it's not animating in my hand. If I look back, it's going to start animating my hand. And the reason why it happens is not because I gave it any code to animate or anything. The reason is because I don't update any rotations at all. And because I don't update any rotations at all, it's going to use the last rotations that we used. Which are those? Well, those rotations are the last one of these we rendered. So if I move around here, the order of which one these renders might change like that if I lose someone in view. And if you take a close look on this item here, you can see that it's actually going to jump a bit up and down when I lose track of the last one, like so. So this is not good. It's one thing that it's animating your hand. That's not the problem itself. The problem itself is that we don't control the animation in our hand. It's just going to look like that depending on these guys. So for instance, if I look away from it and do time set night, it's not going to update just because, well, we can't see anything, any of the droids, and therefore we won't render that. However, if you look at them, it's going to update instantly and render like the other ones. Boom. So animation in the hands are totally fine, but not if they are controlled by the droids that we do see, because they are going to, we can just see the last one that's being rendered, which might not be the one we want, and so on. So we shouldn't have it like this. We should fix that. So that's the next step. So how do we do that? Well, we obviously need to do something better than this, because at the moment we just skip that part like that if the droid is null. So that's a problem. So what I'm going to change it to is the following. I remove that, and then I'm going to use these values here. Right, so core rotation, and I'm going to call this first one core rotation. Then I'm going to set this one here to panel rotation, I guess, and that's going to be the second value here, panel rotation. There we go. Here we can use the panel outer rotation. There you go. And that's going to be this one, panel outer rotation. And finally the I don't know, helmet position, you know. And this is the helmet position. There you go. However, we have I don't need that one anymore. However, what we have now is 3 of the colors. Like, what should those be? Which color should we have? And we can't do like we did before, because we just have 3. We have 3 values, but we just one there to use. And the solution here is very simple, but we're going to take a look on that a bit later, just in a few minutes. So I'm just going to remove the color for now. That's going to make all the cores white, but we'll take a look on that in just a second. So what we want to do now is actually apply the rotations properly. So if we head over to the render droid, that's the one that renders the entity itself. Now we want to actually update these properly. So here we want the core rotation, droid.get core rotation. Here we want the panel rotation, so get panel droid obviously .get panel rotation. Here we want droid as well .get it's outer panel rotation, and here we want droid .get helmet position, like so. So now we're going to send those along there when we render it as an entity, but we also need to send along some values over here when we render it as as an item. So what do we need with the core rotation? Well, that can be 0, that's totally fine. What about the panel, the inner one? That can be 0 as well, that's totally fine. The outer one, however, I want that to be in its retracted state, and if we would take a look, then what we know is that its retracted state is minus half a pi. Like so. So therefore that's going to be its value no matter what. We're always going to use that value. And for the helmet location, we want that to be its default location, which is the location we had in when it didn't render, well, not render, but animate. It didn't animate, and that's -6. So now we actually give the model some values to use, and then we still get the values from the entity when we render the entity, like this. So it's still going to animate, because the core rotation here is going to update, the panel rotation there is going to update, these ones are also going to update, but when we render it from the item, we can just give it different values here, not a problem at all. Let's take a look. Here we go. Log into single player, and we'll take a look on these things here. Set it to day, time set day, and as you can see now, these are still updating, these guys. They are updating properly, but as you also can see in my hand, it's not updating. So don't care about if I look at them or not, it's not going to be affected, which means that this is solid. It won't mess up just because we look at the droids or something like that. Of course, we could make these animate as well if we use the item properly, but usually I guess you don't want to do that. But if you wanted to, that would be totally fine. But then the difference would obviously be that we controlled that animation properly, and that we didn't just use whatever the last entity we rendered had. So if we wanted that to update, what we would do is simply use the item here. So we could get things from the item stack. We'll take a look on that in just a second. So what I want to do now is implement the color again. Obviously we're not using it. So how do we do that? Because we can't really fit any more floats in here, we just have one. But like I said, the solution is very, very simple. There's actually nothing forcing us to override the normal rendering code here. The normal rendering code, if we take a look in model base here, open declaration, it's just an empty one. We're just overriding that to define how we want to render it. However, like I said, there's nothing forcing us to do so, because the only times we're actually rendering this model, well, we're controlling that code. Here, we're defining how, like, from there, and we're defining it from here as well. So what we could do is just modify it to something else. So what I want to do is just remove that override and instead have like core red, float core green, and finally float core blue, like that. So we can totally add more. Now we can't override it obviously, but we can still do this. And now we don't even use the entity anymore, so we don't even have to send that along if we don't want to. So we can just ask for the different rotations we want, or if we want to, we can ask for the entity as well and do specific things. If we have the entity, it doesn't really matter. We just need to make sure that we're calling the correct method. We'll take a look at that in just a second. So now what we want to do here is obviously core red, like that, core green, and finally core blue, like that. So now we can just define that, and what we'll have to make sure is to fix how we call this method, because as you might see in here, if you take a look, there's no errors. So it would totally work if we ran the code now, but it wouldn't be rendered properly. And why is that? Well, if we take a look in render droid, it's still using the old method, and that's going to be calling nothing. You know, the model base didn't have a rendering code. So what we need to make sure is actually to change this to the new one. So we remove the droid itself, and here in the end I want to add the different colors. So droid.get red color, droid.get green color, and finally droid.get blue color, like that. A very long line, and we might want to split that up in multiple ones, but never mind. So there you go. Now we will send along all the information from the droid itself to the model, so the model can be rendered properly. And in the render droid item, we want to give it the colors here as well. Remove the null from there, and here we want to define the colors. We can just do like 0.5, you know, 0, 1, or something like that. And what this would do, what it would do would just to well, set the default color to be sort of purplish. We have quite a lot of blue, a bit of red, like that, and that's just the default color that we will always use. But maybe what we want to have is that the color means something. Maybe the color, it means which type of droid that we do have. But if that were the case, then, well, how would we do it? Well, probably if we had different types of droid, like a repair droid, a attack droid, or what not, maybe we would store that inside the item stack, like as a damage value. That would be the proper thing to do. So then we could just do like item dot damage, get damage. Yeah, you know, what is it? Get item damage value, there you go. And then just use that to define different colors. And just to give an example of that, what I'm going to do is actually define it depending on the stack size, which might seem a bit silly, but it's totally possible. So what I want to do is simply do item.stack size divided by 64. That means that if we have a full stack, that's 64 items, we will have a lot of blue. We will have the full blue, basically, and we'll have still 0.5 red here. If we just have one item, we will have so little blue, we'll have 1 divided by 64, and that's basically going to make the item kind of red, yes, because, you know, that one is red, 0.5 there, and 0 as the green. So that will be making the core red. Otherwise, if we have a ton of items, we will have the core as blue, and then we'll have, or purple, I guess, and then we will have it gradually change there, like that. But you can totally modify this depending on the damage value, and that would probably make more sense, like that. So let's run it and take a look. Okay. Here we go. And now I have two stacks here. Now if I take a look on them there's the red one, and there's the purple one, because here I have a stack of 60. If I remove a few of those, the color will change a bit, so now it's a bit red, purplish there, whereas this is completely red, and if I move these back here, it's going to look like that. There you go. But of course we can drop them as well, but there we go, that was red, we saw that very clearly, and then we can drop this stack there, and we have a problem. As you can see, there's one item being rendered properly, there we go, in there, but the other ones are actually being purple. And the reason why that happens is that we don't reset the colors. When we render the entity themselves, each time we render a new entity, it will reset the colors. And that's the same thing when we have just the model once here. But here it's going to draw the models multiple times, and it's not going to reset the colors in between. So if you modify the color, then what's going to happen when we draw the next one is that it's going to use that color when that is being rendered. So what we'll have to make sure, if we modify the color, obviously we don't have to do this if we don't modify the color, but what we have to do is just reset it here before we do the drawing. So GL color 4F, and then we can just use 1F, 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 and 1F. So now what's going to happen is that we set the color before we render the core, and then we set the color to white before we render the rest, and now everything should work properly. Sweet. We'll take a look on that next time we start, I think. Right. So the next thing I want to do is make things render properly. Oh well, let's start. I'm going to start it now so I can show you a problem that we have. We have another problem that we just solved. So then we can take a look on the colors being rendered properly when we inspect the issues that we had. I'm not sure that you have noticed them, but if you take a closer look, you can see the problems. Well, I have actually mentioned a few. So now if I drop the whole stack there, it's going to be rendered properly, and we can see the purple cores there. However, the issue is this. Look at that. The item is floating. I think you noticed. It's floating, so I'm actually not holding it. It's a bit off there. Another thing is, when I hold it in my hand, it's very far down. We can barely see it. If we compare that to a grass block here, we can see that much of the grass block. We can barely see this droid here. And in the item as well, in inventory, sorry, we can see that it's on the top here. It's almost touching the edge there, so it would be looking better if we moved it a bit down. So how do we do this? We want to move it differently depending on how we render it, in like 3D, well, 3D, third person, if we want to render it in like first person, or if we want to render it in inventory and so on. And we can totally do that. We can render it differently depending on where we want it to be rendered. And that's basically this type here. So if we open declaration and take a look, what we can see is that we have entity, that's when it is dropped on the ground. If it's equipped, that's it. That is if we can see it in third person, so maybe someone else is equipping it or something like that. Equipped first person is obviously when we have that equipped in first person, and then we have inventory, like that. We also have a fifth one called first person map, and that's used if you're making maps. If you don't have a proper item map, then that one is never going to be used, so usually you don't have to bother about that one. But as you can see, there are plenty of comments here. So if we go into the item renderer, and what is that? Well, you should recognize that. That is the interface we're implementing. So if we do that, we can find the item render type enumeration in here, and there are plenty of comments. Right. Okay, so let's implement this. Render droid item. What do I want to do? Well, we could render things completely different depending on the type, but what I'm going to do is simply move it around a bit, so it's going to be rendered properly in the proper location. We don't have to tell it exactly where to be rendered, of course. As we saw, it was almost in the hand of the player. It was almost correctly in the slot. It was indeed in the slot, maybe not exactly where we wanted to, but it still were there. And when we had it in our hand in first person, it was still there as well. So we don't have to like calculate where is the hand, where is the slot, and so on. That is already being handled. But maybe it was a bit off compared to what we wanted to. So that's what I'm going to fix here. And that, of course, depends on the model you have. If you have a model that looks different, then maybe you won't have these problems, or maybe this problem will be even bigger. So that's why it won't know for sure exactly where to put them, and that's basically what we're going to fix here. Case inventory. gl11.gl translate translate f like that, and what I want is 0, I don't know, 0.12 maybe, and 0 like that. So basically what I'm checking is if the current rendering type here is the inventory, then I want to move it a bit down. The positive number is down there, and therefore that should be put in the slot a bit better than before. Let's take a look on that one. Here we go. And now we should see that since we did that, it should have moved, but it shouldn't have moved for anything else. So there we go. So now it's not touching the upper edge anymore, so it was moved a bit down. It might have, well, we might have moved, maybe should have moved it a bit further if we wanted to fit the block, but I think it's quite in a good location there. Look at that, we can compare it with the block. So I just translated it down a bit, but it didn't affect the one we're holding. It's still that far down, and it's still that off when we hold it like that. So that's probably what we want to do next. So what I'm going to head over to here is do case equipped. So remember, that's when we can see it in third person, or basically when we can see it for anyone else as well, because that's obviously in third person. And what I want to do here is translate it a bit differently. Let's use F there. Okay, so what I want to do here is minus 0.8f, and that's basically going to move it in the side. So if we would have a great value there, or like +3 or whatnot, it would sort of look like we had it in the left hand, not the normal hand there. So that would look a bit weird, because it will still be controlled by the right hand. So that's basically the sidewise movement there. Then we want to move it up a bit, because it was a bit far down. So remember, in the third person it was a bit far down. It was even further down when we had it in first person. So I'm going to move it up by that 0.2 like so, and finally I'm going to move it closer to the player. You know, we had a big gap there, so therefore 0.7 like so. Oops. Finally, I'm going to do a break there and add the other case here for the first person like that. Okay, so what do we want to do here? Well, we simply want to move it up a bit, and I'm also going to move it a bit to the right side so it looks a bit better. And as you can see here, the only thing I'm doing, depending on which render type we have, which is in the inventory and equipped and so on, is where I want to render it. You can totally render different models if you want to. Maybe you want to have one model, 7 there, one model when we render it in the inventory, and one model when you have it in first person, another model when you render it when it's dropped on the ground, and so on. And you can totally do that. The only reason why I don't do that is because I don't need it, but if I wanted to, I can just move like the model code in here into the inventory, so I wanted it added in specific inventory and so on. If it's not any of those, what I want to do is just use default there. We can add break there just for the sake of it. And what we get here is now one translation when we have it in the inventory, one when it's equipped, and one when it's equipped in first person, just to move them around a bit, to place them where we want them for it to look better. So the item is not too far up, the 3D one is not too far from your hand, and the equipped one is not too far down, so we barely can see it. Let's take a look on what we just did. Right, so now if we head into the map again, we can take a look on these droids in the hands as well. So now if we take a look, it's still good in the inventory here, but as you can see now, it's pretty good when it comes to you know, holding it in the hand. It's a bit further up now than the grass block, and if that's what we want to, then it's fine. If we didn't want that, we can move it a bit down again. So tweak that depending on where we want it to be. If we take a look in third person, we can also see that Steve holds it in the hand. Maybe we want to rotate it a bit if we don't want the upper part to face like that. Maybe we want it to fit the hand a bit better by rotating it a bit, and if we wanted to, then we could totally do so. It's just a matter of, well, rotating things here, moving them around, or maybe even render things completely different. Sweet. Right, but this brings us to another thing. These two methods up here that we haven't been using yet, or well, we return true all the time. And if we take a look here, handle render type, what we get is the following. We get an item stack, that's the item itself, and we also get the type here, and that's the same type that we worked with when we rendered the whole thing. And this type here and the item, we can use those to define when this rendering handler, or well, item renderer, should be used. Well, at the moment we're always using it, so we don't care about the item, we don't care about the type. The only thing we care about is obviously when we register it for a specific ID, but apart from that, we render it all the time, and that was the wrong thing. So what I want to do here, just to give an example of what we can do, is for instance say, alright, if the type is not equals to item render type dot entity. What this is going to do is it's going to return true if we hold it in our hand, if someone else is holding it in that person's hand, if you have it in the inventory. And therefore, because it returns true, what we're going to do is, well, that we're going to do this rendering here. And depending, of course, of the type, we do those things, blah blah blah, like we did before. But if it's dropped, if it's an entity that we have on the ground, we're not going to use this item renderer. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to be rendered. What that means is that it's going to use the rendering code we would have otherwise. And what is that? Well, that's the default one with icons and so on. So we're going to use the icon from previous lectures when I just had a simple icon for the item. So that's one's going to look, or rather the dropped item is going to look like the icon, whereas a picked up item and an equipped item is going to look like the model of the entity itself, so that droid with solar panels and everything like that. But we can obviously use the item as well, and this is just an example anyway. So what I can do is item dot stack size is not equals to 1. So now if you know, if the stack size is 1, then it's still going to look like an icon. I don't know exactly why you would want to do that. It's probably going to look a bit silly, but just as an example, as you can see, that we can define when things should be rendered by this item renderer and when it shouldn't. And if it shouldn't, it's going to use the default rendering part there. If we simply want things to go invisible, then we can just ignore drawing the model here, depending on the type that we get during the renderer. But usually when we don't want to render things with the item renderer, what we want to do is render them by default, or rather by the default code with the icons and so on. Rightio, so into single player and open up the world. Right, so as you can see now, this floating droid here has, well, that's using the ugly icon that I've used earlier in earlier lectures, and this stack here is using, you know, the model itself, the good-looking thingy there, or at least decent-looking model there. Yes, because, well, when we have a stack size of 1, we said, well, then it should return false, and therefore we're not using the item renderer. We can take a look on that. If I drop one of these in different stacks, then they will be rendered like so, but if I pick them up again and group them, they're going to use the rendering like that. So, like I said, it's a bit silly to use the stack size there, but it's easier to show you. Maybe what would make more sense would be to use the get item damage like that. So if it's type 3 here, then we don't want to use it. You know, we have subtypes, and type 3 shouldn't use the model, it should use the default icon way or whatnot. That's an example. Maybe we have a damaged one, like we have a some sort of weapon, I don't know, that is not charged, and then we want to use a default icon for that. But when we charge it up, maybe we want it to look like this weapon, so we can equip it in first person and you know, see that we have a weapon, whereas when it's not charged, maybe we don't want it to be like that. And if the damage value is 0, means that it's not charged, then we can just do it like that. So if it's not charged, if it's completely destroyed, then we want to have it as an icon, otherwise we would have it as the correct model, like so. And as we also saw, if I drop it on the ground, even if I drop it as a stack, it's going to look like the icons like that. And the only reason why that is the case is, of course, because I define it like that. And it doesn't really make sense that it looks like this, but one possible way of doing it would maybe be that when you have it equipped in first person or in third person, then we want to render it. Maybe it's a gun of some sort, maybe it's an item of some sort, a tool, I don't know. But when we have it in the inventory or dropped it on the ground, maybe we want it to look like an icon, because maybe the model itself is too big to be rendered properly in the inventory. Maybe it just looks weird when you have it there. So we might want to have an icon there, but when you have it equipped, we want it to look like we're actually equipping a tool. And if so, we can of course just do it depending on things like that. So we can do like equipped, or not, sorry, equipped. We should have it. It should be equal to. Oops, I'm just messing things up now. Equals to equipped, like that, or it's equal to item render type dot equipped first person. That will make sure that this item would only be rendered with the item renderer if we are equipping it somehow, but otherwise if it just dropped in the world or we have it in the inventory or whatnot, then we would see its icon that we're defining normally with the item itself. So that's totally what we can do, but for now I'm actually going to tell it, well, you can be rendered no matter what, so just return true. Like that, so we don't care about the item nor the rendering type there. But now it's time to take a look on this other thing. Should use rendering, well, not rendering helper, but should use render helper. And obviously we get a helper here, and it's asking us, should we use this? Let's take a look of what this item renderer is. So open declaration here. And now if we head over to that one, we'll see that we have a few different ones here. So entity rotation, entity bobbing, equipped block, block 3D, and inventory blocks. These are sort of effects that are going to be applied to this rendering. We'll take a look very soon on that. But what I want to note first is we're still in the item renderer, so that's the interface. So if you're wondering about anything of these, any of these things, you should be able to tell most of those things by just checking in the interface itself, because this interface here is very well commentated. So we have the three different methods here. Render item should use render helper and handle render type, and then we have the two enumerations, and the values are fairly good commentated like that. So what we want to do is enter item render helper here is to define which sort of effects we want to use. So if we head over to the rendering code again, what we can do is say, like, alright, return true if the helper here, that's the enumeration there, is not equal to item renderer helper dot, for instance, entity bobbing. Okay, let's run that, and I will describe exactly what's going on. Right, so what's happening here is basically that we define which well, helper thing is to use, and what I basically did here was to say, alright, return true unless this is the entity bobbing thingy. And what entity bobbing means is that when we drop an item on the ground, there, it's going to go up and down a bit in that animation there. But if I have disabled that one, if I drop this here, it's still going to spin, but as you can see, it's not going up and down. It's glitching a bit up and down there. I don't know exactly why, but the bobbing that it has in the rendering there is gone, but it's still rotating. And if we wanted to, we could of course remove that as well if we just do add helper is not equals to item renderer helper.entity rotation. So if we run it now, we'll see that the block, well, the dropped item, sorry, will be completely still. It's not going to bob up and down, and it's not going to rotate because we just disabled those two things. And as you saw, there are a few other ones as well, a few other helps there that we can use if we want to, so we can disable those as well. And when we do so, we also get the type, like how we render it, and the item as well, so we can take those two into account as well. So maybe we want it to rotate if it's a specific type, or maybe we want it to rotate if, you know, if we have enough of, I don't know, whatever. But now if we drop it there, as you can see, it's not rotating at all like so, but obviously the grass block is like that. So now they are completely still like that, which could look good for some things. Maybe you don't want them to rotate for some reason, and then you can just disable those things like that. So it's very easy to do so, like that. There we go. So now we can have them in the inventory here, and they look quite a lot like the real ones here, because we use the same model, but we tweak it a bit. So we're using some default values. These are obviously not rotating, but now they are placed properly. It looks good when we hold it no matter what, and there we go. So that's pretty much it for now. After the break, we'll take a look on how we can render blocks. So this has been everything for rendering items with models and so on, but when we render blocks, we will have to do it in a bit of a different way. We're not going to use models, because when we render block, render a block, it's a bit more restricted, but we'll see that in about 15 minutes, so I'll see you then.